From Goblin to Mysterio, from Venom to Sandman and Lizard, we've seen how hateable villains elevate the stakes, challenge the hero, and stick in our minds long after the credits roll. But what happens when a villain falls flat? Yup, we're talking about boring villains. The ones that don't spark fear, intrigue, or even a flicker of interest. But here's the thing. A boring villain doesn't just fail themselves. They drag down the hero, weaken the stakes, and leave the audience feeling underwhelmed. Wait, what? A bad villain can ruin a whole story? Let's break it down. A great villain reflects the hero, testing their values, their resolve, and their growth. A boring villain? They don't add to the story. They don't push the hero to evolve, and they certainly don't make us care about the outcome, ultimately forcing us to want more. In our last video, How to Make a Hateable Character, we explored the powers of Spider-Man's iconic rogues gallery, how their schemes, personalities, and connections to Peter Parker create unforgettable tension. And as promised, today we're flipping the script. We're dissecting what makes a villain boring and why these missteps can turn even the most exciting story into a slog. But don't worry, this isn't just a roast session. We're here to learn, because understanding what doesn't work is just as important as knowing what does. And Spider-Man's universe? It's the perfect playground to figure out why some villains soar while others, well, flop. It's time to uncover the pitfalls of boring villains and why they're the kryptonite of great storytelling. And if you haven't already, subscribe and hit that bell icon to get notified the moment we release our weekly episode. Because the next episode in the Fantastic Character Development series dives into the question that shifts the narrative. What if the villain had a point? So, what really makes a Spider-Man villain boring? Is it their lack of motivation, their uninspired design, or maybe it's just their failure to pose a meaningful threat? The truth is, it's all of the above, and more. A boring villain doesn't just lack personality, they lack purpose. Let's start with the Lizard, Dr. Kirk Connors. On paper, he has everything needed to be a compelling villain. A personal connection to Peter Parker, a sympathetic backstory as a scientist desperate to heal his disability, and a transformative ability that makes him a physical threat. But here's where it falls apart. His motivations take a nosedive into absurdity. Yes. After transforming into the Lizard, Dr. Connors suddenly decides it's a great idea to turn all of New York City into reptiles. Why? It's never clear. His reasoning's so thin that it undermines the stakes entirely. Instead of posing an emotional and philosophical challenge to Peter Parker, the Lizard's actions feel more like a plot device.
You stopped me once. You won't stop me again.
Here's the problem. A villain without logical or relatable motives doesn't engage the audience. When Peter defeats the Lizard, it doesn't feel like a triumph over a meaningful adversary. It feels like Spider-Man's cleaning up someone else's mess. And that's not the kind of story we remember. Now let's move on to Sandman from Spider-Man 3. Unlike the Lizard, Flint Marko starts with a deeply emotional motivation. He's a father trying to save his sick daughter. That's the kind of backstory that can make a villain relatable, even if they're doing terrible things. But here's where things go wrong. The movie never fully commits to exploring this aspect of his character. Instead of exploring his desperation or his internal conflict, Sandman's emotional arc is sidelined. Most of his screen time is spent in CGI-heavy fight sequences, which, while visually impressive, lack the emotional weight that make a villain memorable. By the end of the movie, his story's so underdeveloped that his final confrontation with Spider-Man feels hollow. Because it was never given the focus it deserved. Sandman's motivations are muddled, and his role in the story becomes secondary to the chaotic overload of villains in Spider-Man 3. And when he reappears in No Way Home, things only get worse. In No Way Home, Sandman's motivations are so unclear that he feels like a passive observer rather than an active participant in the story. Is he an ally? An antagonist? Even the movie doesn't seem to know. Without clear stakes or purpose, Sandman ends up being forgettable, despite his visual potential. Here's the big takeaway. Boring villains like the Lizard and Sandman fail because they don't challenge Spider-Man in meaningful ways. Their lack of emotional stakes, clear motivations, and deep connection to Peter Parker's journey make them feel more like obstacles than true antagonists. But here's the silver lining. Understanding what makes these villains boring can teach us valuable lessons about what not to do when crafting compelling antagonists. Now, let's uncover how boring villains can serve as a guide for building stronger, unforgettable adversaries. And if you're ready to flip the script yet again and explore villains with nuance, we have that covered as well. The next episode, What If the Villain Had a Point, is all about understanding the villains who might not have been entirely wrong. Now, what can we learn from the Lizard and Sandman? While they might not be the most memorable villains in Spider-Man's cinematic history, they serve as cautionary tales for storytellers. A boring villain isn't just a missed opportunity, it's a drag on the entire story. But here's the good news. Understanding their flaws gives us the blueprint for creating better antagonists. First, let's address the elephant, or should we say reptile, in the room. How to raise the stakes. A compelling villain raises the stakes by threatening what matters most to the hero. The Lizard had a chance to do this by targeting Peter Parker's sense of responsibility or his personal relationships. Instead, his goal of turn everyone into lizards felt like a cartoonish afterthought, disconnected from Peter's journey. Here's the trick. Tie the villain's actions directly to the hero's emotional core. Imagine if the Lizard's plans had endangered Aunt May, or challenged Peter's belief in science as a force for good. Now, that would have been a battle worth watching. Next up, motivation. A villain's goal should be clear, personal, and ideally, make us question whether they're entirely wrong. Sandman's story started strong, but it faltered when the film failed to explore his motivation in depth. Like a sandcastle at high tide, a weak villain gets washed away when their motivation isn't clear. When a villain's goals are inconsistent, their impact fizzles out. The lesson here? Give the villain a purpose that's not only understandable, but also forces the hero to make difficult choices. Imagine if Spider-Man had been forced to choose between stopping Sandman and helping him save his daughter. That kind of conflict sticks with audiences. Finally, let's talk about presence. A great villain commands attention every time they're on screen. The Lizard and Sandman struggled because their designs and personalities left a milder impression in the shadow of Spider-Man's greatness, which strangely makes these villains great collector's items to complete the Marvel Legends series. To bring greater clarity to these gray areas of storytelling, these characters will leap from the screen and into the hands of your incredible villains collection. With Lizard and Sandman Marvel Legends series action figures, the amazing details and film-inspired design bring these stories to life in new ways. Have both sent directly to you through the 2 links in the description below. Out of the hundreds of villains in Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery, only these few stand out enough to be brought to the big screen. While some adaptations might occur as boring, we also see the contrast of Green Goblin's chilling duality, Mysterio's larger-than-life illusions, and Venom literally bonding with hosts, Spider-Man not being immune to the strength of this indelible antagonist. A memorable villain doesn't just look cool, they make us feel the gravity and stakes of the hero's quest. So, what's the ultimate takeaway? Boring villains like the Lizard and Sandman remind us of the importance of stakes, motivation, and presence. Without these elements, even the most visually impressive antagonist can feel hollow. But when done right, a villain doesn't just challenge the hero, they elevate the entire story. And here's the best part. Not every villain's purely evil. Sometimes the most compelling antagonists are the ones who blur the lines between right and wrong. In our next video, What If the Villain Had a Point? We'll explore Spider-Man's rogues who make us question whether they were really the bad guys after all. Click there now, and we'll explore this fantastic character development journey together. The villains are the perfect reminder that even antagonists have layers, and sometimes the best stories don't just make us hate them, they make us think.